My name is Frank Miller. I'm 58 years old. I've lived in the same house for almost 3 decades. I believed I understood loss. I buried my father. I survived disappointments. I learned how to stay quiet when silence kept the peace. But I was wrong. Because nothing prepares you for the moment you realize the person sleeping beside you no longer respects what made you who you are. Nothing prepares you for discovering that a piece of your past, something sacred, has been sold without your knowledge, laughed off as worthless, and traded for someone else's convenience. This is the story of the old bicycle my late father left me, and how the man who bought it uncovered something my father hid just in case. The garage was empty. That was the first thing I noticed standing in my kitchen with a mug of coffee growing cold in my hands. The door to the garage was half open, wrong in itself, but it was the silence that caught me. The kind of silence that feels heavier than noise. The kind that tells you something important is missing. My father's bicycle was gone. 40 years of memory, gone. Sold while I slept. I didn't scream. I didn't run. I just stood there staring through the window above the sink, already knowing that whatever explanation I was about to hear would change everything. I set the mug down slowly, like any sudden movement might shatter something fragile inside me. The house was quiet. Too quiet for a weekday morning. Diane's side of the bed had been empty when I woke up, but that wasn't unusual. She liked to start her mornings early, liked feeling productive before the world caught up. I walked toward the back door, every step heavy, deliberate. When I pushed it open, spring air rushed in, cool, damp smelling of fresh grass and soil. The lawn needed mowing. My father would have noticed that right away. He used to say a yard told you everything about a man. The concrete of the patio was cold beneath my slippers. I hadn't bothered to change shoes. I crossed the yard slowly, my eyes fixed on the garage like it might correct itself if I didn't rush it. The door was open just enough to see inside. The hook on the wall was bare. No silver frame. No worn black seat with a tear on the right edge. No leather handle grips darkened by decades of use. Just a clean outline on the wall where the bicycle had hung, dust lighter there than anywhere else. A ghost shape. My chest tightened. My father, Ray Miller, had owned that bicycle longer than he'd owned his first car. He bought it secondhand in the late 70s, fixed it up piece by piece, rode it to work when money was tight, and later used it to teach me how to balance without fear. I could still hear his voice behind me on the sidewalk, steady and calm. "Keep pedaling, Frankie. Don't look down. Trust yourself." I stepped into the garage. The smell was still there. Oil, metal, old wood. Familiar. Comforting. The bicycle pump leaned against the wall where he'd left it the last time he visited. I hadn't moved it. Couldn't bring myself to. I reached out and touched the empty hook. My fingers were shaking. Frank. Diane's voice came from behind me, light and casual, like she'd just asked whether I wanted eggs or toast. I turned slowly. She stood in the doorway, between the house and the garage, already dressed, keys in her hand. Her hair was neat, her expression unreadable. "Where's the bike?" I asked. She blinked once, just once. "Oh," that she said, waving a hand as if I'd asked about an old box of junk. "I sold it." The words didn't land right away. They floated between us, harmless on the surface, absurd in their simplicity. What I said. She sighed the way someone sighs when explaining something obvious to a child. "Frank, come on. Evan needed money. It was just sitting there." My stomach dropped. "That was my father's bicycle," I said. My voice sounded distant even to me. She shrugged. "Your father is gone." The sentence hit harder than any insult could have. "And Evan," she continued, stepping closer, "is alive. He has bills, opportunities. You don't even ride that thing." I stared at her, trying to reconcile the woman in front of me with the person I thought I'd married. "You sold it without asking me," I said. She laughed, not cruelly, worse, casually. "My son needs money," she said. "Why keep trash?" The word echoed in my head. Trash. I felt something inside me crack, not loudly, not all at once. Just a quiet fracture, the kind you don't feel until you try to put weight on it later. I wanted to yell. I wanted to ask how she could reduce my father, his hands, his lessons, his love to a word like that. But nothing came out. I turned away from her and walked back into the garage. Behind me, I heard a car door close. Evan. His footsteps were hesitant, slow. "Frank," he said, not meeting my eyes. "Look, I know this is awkward, but..." How much, I asked. He hesitated. 500. I laughed once, a short broken sound. $500 for a lifetime. I didn't say anything else. I just stood there staring at the empty wall, feeling smaller than I had in years. They left soon after. Diane kissed my cheek like nothing had happened. Evan avoided my gaze. Their car pulled out of the driveway, tires crunching softly over gravel. The silence returned. I locked the garage door, turned off the light, walked back into the house alone. I sat at the kitchen table and stared at my hands. These were the same hands my father had guided onto those handlebars, the same hands that now felt useless. That was when my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost ignored it. But something, instinct maybe, or my father's voice echoing faintly in my head, made me answer. Mr. Miller, a man said, careful and polite. My name is Caleb Hart. I bought a bicycle yesterday, an old one. My breath caught. There's something you need to know, he continued. Sir, I found something inside. I closed my eyes. And for the first time that morning, I felt something other than loss. I felt the faint pull of truth rising to the surface. I didn't answer Caleb right away. I sat there at the kitchen table with the phone pressed to my ear, staring at a small chip in the wood near my thumb. I'd always meant to sand it down, refinish the surface. My father would have noticed it immediately. He had an eye for small flaws, said they were how you learned where something had been. Sir Caleb said again, his voice careful, like he didn't want to spook me. I'm sorry if I'm calling out of the blue. I think you should see it. What did you find? I asked. There was a pause, long enough to tell me he was choosing his words. Something your father hid, he said, on purpose. The room felt suddenly smaller. I looked toward the hallway, half expecting Diane to appear, arms crossed, ready to take control of the conversation. But the house was still. Quiet in that hollow way it gets after someone leaves and takes the air with them. Where are you? I asked. Caleb gave me an address on the east side of town, near the old freight yard, where the warehouses had been turned into workshops and small businesses. I wrote it on the back of an envelope with a shaking hand. I'll be there, I said, and hung up before he could say anything else. I didn't rush. I didn't want to give the moment that satisfaction. I rinsed my mug, set it upside down in the rack, and changed out of my slippers. As I pulled on my jacket, I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror, gray at the temples lines, deeper than they used to be. I looked tired, older than I'd felt yesterday. I locked the front door and stood on the porch for a second, breathing in the cool spring air. Across the street, Mrs. Keller was watering her roses. She waved. I lifted a hand back. Normal life moving on, oblivious to the quiet war happening behind my eyes. The drive felt longer than it was. Traffic lights lingered on red. Every radio station seemed to be playing something upbeat, mocking. I turned it off and let the hum of the engine fill the car. I kept hearing Diane's voice in my head. Why keep trash? It wasn't just what she said. It was how easily she said it, how quickly my father had been reduced to an inconvenience. I thought about all the times she'd suggested clearing out the garage, donating old stuff, making the house feel lighter. I'd always said later. There was no rush. Apparently, she'd decided otherwise. Caleb's workshop sat at the end of a narrow street, tucked between a tire shop and a boarded-up building with faded lettering. A hand-painted sign hung above the door, Hart Restorations, Vintage and Custom. The windows were clean. The place looked cared for. I parked and sat for a moment, hands on the steering wheel, steadying myself. Whatever I was about to see, I needed to be present for it. Not angry, not reactive. My father hated that. Said anger made you sloppy. Inside the shop smelled like metal oil and old rubber. Sunlight streamed through high windows, catching dust in the air. Bicycles lined the walls, some stripped to frames, others gleaming like museum pieces. Caleb stood near a workbench, wiping his hands on a rag. He was about my age, maybe a little younger, with graying hair and eyes that carried a quiet seriousness. Mr. Miller, he said, extending a hand. I'm glad you came. I shook it. His grip was firm, respectful. It's Frank, I said. He nodded. Frank, come with me. He didn't say anything else as he led me deeper into the shop. My heart started to pound when I saw it. The bicycle. It leaned against a stand under a hanging light, just as my father used to position it when he was working on it. The silver frame caught the light the same way it always had. The bell on the handlebar was still there, slightly crooked. The seat, patched years ago, hadn't been replaced. Caleb hadn't altered it. Not really. He'd cleaned it, yes. Treated it gently. Like he understood it wasn't just a thing. She's in good shape, he said quietly. Whoever took care of her knew what they were doing. My father, I said. He nodded, I thought so. I stepped closer, my fingers hovering just above the handlebar before I let myself touch it. The metal was cool, solid, real. I swallowed hard. Evan didn't know what he was selling, Caleb said. I could tell. He wanted it gone fast. I didn't respond. There was something off, though, Caleb continued. Weight distribution, a faint rattle when I lifted it. He moved to the seat post and loosened it with practiced ease. As he slid it out, he turned the frame slightly so I could see. Inside the hollow tube was a small metal sleeve, sealed and snug-fitted so precisely it looked like it belonged there. I've been restoring bikes for 20 years, Caleb said. You don't hide something like this by accident. He reached in carefully and pulled out a manila envelope, edges worn, and beneath it a tiny brass key taped to a strip of paper. My name was written on the envelope in neat, familiar handwriting. Frank. My knees went weak. I grabbed the edge of the workbench to steady myself. He told me to call you if this ever left his hands, Caleb said softly. Said I'd know when. I stared at the envelope, afraid to open it, afraid of what it might say, afraid of what it might confirm. My father had seen something coming. I took the envelope from Caleb with trembling fingers. The paper felt heavier than it should have. Before I could open it, my phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from Diane. Where are you? I didn't answer. I looked back at the bicycle, at the hidden compartment, at the proof that my father had known enough to prepare. For the first time since that morning, the loss shifted into something sharper, clearer, understanding. And it came with a question I couldn't ignore anymore. What else had my father been trying to protect me from? I didn't open the envelope right away. I stood there in Caleb's workshop with my father's bicycle between us, my name staring back at me in ink I hadn't seen since childhood birthday cards and permission slips. The shop felt too quiet, like it was holding its breath with me. Caleb stepped back without being asked, giving me space. I appreciated that. My father always said you could tell a lot about a man by how he handled moments that didn't belong to him. Take your time, Caleb said. There's no rush. I nodded, though my pulse was thudding hard in my ears. I turned the envelope over once, then again. It was sealed, but not with glue, folded carefully the way my father did everything. Practical, intentional. I slid a finger under the flap and opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper folded into thirds. No letterhead, no dates. Just my father's handwriting, steady and familiar. Frank, if you're reading this, it means the bicycle is no longer hanging in your garage. My throat tightened. That means someone decided it was easier to take from you than to ask. I hoped I was wrong about that, but hope isn't a plan, and I've learned to leave plans behind. I exhaled slowly through my nose the way he taught me when my hands shook. I didn't hide this because I didn't trust you. I hid it because I trusted you to understand why when the time came. I lowered the page, my eyes blurring. Caleb pretended to busy himself at the bench, giving me privacy without looking away entirely. I kept reading. There's a key with this letter. It opens something I set aside years ago. It's not about money, not really. It's about independence, about making sure no one can convince you that you are a burden. My grip tightened around the paper. I love you, and if the bicycle brought you here, then it did one last job for me. Dad. I folded the letter carefully and pressed it against my chest. For a moment I could smell his aftershave, hear the scrape of his boots on concrete, feel his hand steadying my back as I wobbled on that bike for the first time. Caleb cleared his throat gently. There's more, he said, inside the sleeve. I nodded and reached into the frame again. Beneath the envelope, taped securely to the metal sleeve, was a narrow strip of paper with a handwritten note in the brass key. First Community Credit Union, Box 318. My stomach flipped. He never mentioned a credit union, I said aloud, mostly to myself. Caleb shrugged. People don't always talk about the things they're most careful with. I looked up at him. Why did you call me? He leaned against the bench, arms crossed loosely. Because your father asked me to. Years ago. That surprised me enough to pull my focus away from the letter. You knew him, I asked. Not well, Caleb said, but enough. He used to come by here once in a while. Never with the bike, just to talk. Ask questions. He wanted to know how people hid things. Safely. Ethically. Ethically, I repeated. Caleb nodded. He said he wasn't trying to trick anyone. He just wanted to make sure something important stayed where the right person could find it. I let that sink in. He told me Caleb continued that if anyone ever sold that bike without you, present it meant something had shifted in your life, that you might need help seeing it. My phone buzzed again in my pocket. Another text from Diane. Evan says you're upset. Don't overreact. I felt a cold clarity settle in my chest. I need to go to the credit union, I said. Caleb nodded like he'd expected that. I'll put the bike back the way it was, he said. You can decide what you want to do with it after. Thank you, I said. The words felt insufficient but sincere. As I turned to leave, he stopped me. Frank. I looked back. Whatever you find, he said, don't let anyone rush you into a decision. That's usually the real goal. I nodded once and walked out into the sunlight. The credit union sat on a quiet corner near the old courthouse brick building, modest sign, the kind of place my father would have trusted. I parked the envelope and key heavy in my jacket pocket. Inside, the air was cool and smelled faintly of paper and coffee. A woman in her 50s with wire-rimmed glasses smiled from behind the counter. Good morning, she said. How can I help you? I'm here for a safe deposit box, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Box 318. She glanced at her computer, then back at me. Name. Frank Miller. She studied the screen a moment longer than expected. Then she looked up. Mr. Miller, she said carefully. Do you have a moment? My pulse picked up again. Yes. She gestured toward a small office. Please. Inside, she closed the door gently behind us. My name is Marianne Cho, she said. I'm the branch manager. Your father was a longtime member here. I nodded. There have been inquiries, she continued, recently, about your accounts. Inquiries, I repeated. She folded her hands on the desk. Someone attempted to open a line of credit in your name last week. The room tilted slightly. Was it approved, I asked? No, she said. Your father placed additional protections on the box and any related accounts. They flagged the attempt immediately. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. I thought you should know, Marianne said, before we proceed. A chill ran through me, not fear exactly, recognition. My father hadn't just hidden something. He'd been watching. And now whatever he'd left me in that box wasn't just a gift. It was a warning. Marianne led me down a short hallway lined with framed photos of the credit union's founding members. Black and white faces stared back at me, men in suits, women in modest dresses, all of them looking serious and careful with their futures. My father would have liked that. He trusted institutions built slowly, brick by brick, not the flashy ones that promised everything at once. She unlocked a heavy steel door and ushered me inside the vault. The air was cooler there, the kind of cold that felt deliberate, secure. Rows of metal boxes lined the walls, each one identical, except for the numbers stamped neatly on their faces. Box 318, she said, stopping midway down the aisle. She slid it out with practiced ease and placed it on the small table between us. I'll give you privacy. She left me alone with the box. For a moment, I just stared at it. The brass key felt warm in my hand now, like it had absorbed something from me. I inserted it into the lock and turned. The mechanism clicked softly. Final. Honest. Inside was a thick manila folder and a smaller envelope, both arranged neatly exactly the way my father used to organize his workbench. Nothing wasted, nothing rushed. I lifted the envelope first. My name was written on the front again, this time slower, the pen strokes slightly heavier. Frank. I opened it carefully. The letter inside was longer than the one from the bicycle, dated 6 months before my father died. Son, if you're here, it means I didn't get a chance to explain this to you myself. I'm sorry for that. I wanted to wait until I was certain, and time didn't give me that courtesy. I swallowed and kept reading. I've noticed patterns, small ones at first, questions asked too casually, paperwork mentioned too often, the way someone talks about what's best without asking what you want. These things matter when a man gets older. People start deciding for him. My jaw tightened. I don't think Diane is cruel, but I do think she listens too much to her son, and I think he sees life as something to take shortcuts through. That makes people careless. The words stung, not because they felt unfair, but because they felt accurate. I don't know if they mean harm. I do know they mean convenience. And convenience has a way of turning into control. I closed my eyes for a second. My father had always said the most dangerous people weren't villains. They were helpers who didn't ask permission. I set the letter aside and opened the manila folder. Inside were documents, copies of bank statements, notes written in my father's hand, dates, times, short observations, factual and restrained. Evan asked about the house deed today, framed it as curiosity. Diane mentioned assisted living someday. Tone was casual. Credit application attempt flag name mismatch. My heart began to race. There were printouts of emails I didn't recognize, loan inquiries I'd never authorized. Nothing completed, just attempts, probes. My father had been documenting everything. At the back of the folder was a single-page summary written clearly, deliberately. Frank, if you're reading this, don't panic. This isn't about betrayal, it's about preparation. You have time, you have options, but only if you don't let anyone rush you. My hands trembled as I folded the papers back into the folder. I sat there in the quiet vault, feeling the weight of my father's foresight settle over me like a blanket. He hadn't been paranoid. He'd been protective. Marianne knocked lightly on the door before stepping back inside. "Are you all right?" she asked. I nodded. "I think so." She glanced at the folder, then back at me. "Your father asked us to notify you if anyone ever attempted to access accounts tied to this box," she said. He was very specific. "Did he say why?" I asked. She hesitated, then shook her head. "Only that he'd seen this kind of thing before. He wanted you insulated." I almost laughed. My father, who'd never invested in anything risky, had somehow invested in peace of mind. "Can you tell me who made the inquiry?" I asked. Marianne nodded. It was submitted online. The name on the request was Evan Brooks. There it was, clean, undeniable. "And Diane?" I asked quietly. "She wasn't listed," Marianne said, "but the contact number matched one on file for her." I closed the folder and slid it back into the box, locked it, turned the key. "Thank you for telling me," I said. She met my eyes. "What you do next is your choice, but if you'd like, we can place additional holds on your accounts. Effective immediately." "Yes," I said without hesitation. "Please." When I stepped back outside, the afternoon sun felt brighter than it had earlier, harsher too. I sat in my car for a long moment, the folder on the passenger seat, the key in my pocket. I thought about Diane's laugh in the garage, about Evan's nervous smile, about how easy it had been for them to decide what mattered and what didn't. I drove home slowly. The house looked the same as it always had. Blue shutters, white porch railing, a place that had held decades of quiet mornings and predictable routines. But I knew now that underneath it, something had shifted. Inside, Diane was at the kitchen counter scrolling through her phone. "There you are," she said without looking up. Evan was worried. "About what?" I asked. She shrugged. "You seemed upset." I set the envelope from the bicycle on the table between us. "Who tried to open a line of credit in my name?" I asked calmly. She froze. Just for a second. Then she laughed lightly. "Frank, don't be dramatic." I watched her carefully, the way her eyes flicked to the envelope, the way her shoulders tightened. "Because the bank didn't think it was dramatic," I said. "Neither did my father." Her smile faltered. That was the moment I knew this wasn't going to resolve quietly. My father hadn't hidden these things to scare me. He'd hidden them to prepare me. And now it was my turn to decide what to protect. Diane recovered quickly. That had always been her strength. She didn't panic. She redirected. As soon as she sensed the ground shifting beneath her, she smoothed her expression and reached for a different tone, concerned, reasonable, almost tender. "Frank," she said, lowering her voice like we were sharing a secret, banks flag things all the time. "Evan was just trying to help you consolidate. You forget passwords. You hate paperwork." I leaned against the counter and folded my arms, mirroring her calm. Inside, my pulse was steady now, focused. "That wasn't your decision to make," I said. Her lips pressed together briefly. "We're married." "And my name is on the account," I replied, alone. She studied me, measuring. I could almost see the calculations happening behind her eyes, how far she could push, how much ground she'd lost. "Evan worries about you," she said. "We both do. You've been quieter since your father passed, more withdrawn." There it was, the language, soft, reasonable, framed as care. "I've been grieving," I said. That's not the same thing. She sighed. You're taking this too personally. I almost smiled at that. Almost. That night after she went to bed, I sat alone at the kitchen table with my father's folder open in front of me. I didn't rush. I didn't skim. I read every note again this time, not as a son, but as a man looking for patterns. The dates told a story. 6 months ago, Diane had mentioned downsizing for the first time. 5 months ago, Evan asked where I kept the house deed. 4 months ago, Diane brought home a brochure for a senior living community and left it on the counter by accident. 3 weeks ago, the credit inquiry. Small steps, logical steps, all leading in the same direction. Control. I pulled out a notebook and started my own list just like my father had. Diane refers to our assets more often lately. Evan asks questions that don't match his needs. Language is always about safety, never permission. By the time I closed the notebook, it was nearly midnight. I slept lightly, waking at every sound. The next morning, I called Lisa Garner. She listened without interrupting as I explained everything: my father's letter, the credit union, the bicycle, the attempted loan. When I finished, there was a pause. You did the right thing by not confronting them emotionally, she said. If they're setting something up, they'll count on you reacting. That gives them leverage. What should I do? I asked. We document, she said. We protect your assets, and we let them show us who they really are. That afternoon, I made changes, quiet ones. I updated my will. I assigned a medical power of attorney to my sister, not Diane. I placed additional security on the house title. I didn't tell Diane. Instead, I acted normal. When Evan came by that weekend, I greeted him warmly, offered him a beer, asked about his job. I watched him relax, the tension easing from his shoulders. Mom says you've been stressed, he said casually. You know we've got your back, right? I nodded. I know. I saw the relief in his eyes. Diane joined us on the porch, smiling, playing the part perfectly. The three of us sat there as the sun went down, neighbors, walking dogs, sprinklers ticking on and off. It could have passed for a peaceful family evening. But I was listening now. So Diane said lightly, Lisa mentioned something interesting the other day. My heart skipped, but I kept my face neutral. Oh, she said there are programs that help simplify things for couples our age, Diane continued. Joint management makes everything easier. Evan nodded. It's smart planning. I took a slow sip of my beer. What kind of planning? Well, Diane said things like putting the house into a trust or adding Evan as a backup signer, just in case. There it was, not rushed, not forced, placed gently on the table like a reasonable suggestion. I'll think about it, I said. They both smiled, not at me, at each other. That night, Diane crawled into bed beside me and rested her hand on my chest. You don't have to carry everything alone, she murmured. I stared at the ceiling. I understood then what my father had meant. This wasn't about malice. It was about momentum, about how easily care could turn into control if no one stopped it. The next morning, I drove back to Caleb's shop. He looked up when I walked in, recognition flashing across his face. You find what you needed? I found more than I expected, I said. He nodded slowly. Your dad was thorough. He was careful, I replied. I need your help. Caleb leaned against the counter. Tell me. I need to know if Diane has sold anything else, I said. Tools, equipment, anything from the garage. Caleb's expression darkened. Actually, yeah. A few weeks ago, a woman came by with some old hand tools. Said they were her husband's. Asked cash, no receipt. My jaw tightened. Did she say why? She said they were clutter, he said. Didn't want them around anymore. The pattern snapped into focus. They weren't reacting to a crisis. They were executing a plan. And now that I could see it clearly, I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going to stop them with anger. I was going to stop them with proof. I didn't sleep much after that. Not because I was afraid, but because my mind wouldn't slow down. Once you see a pattern clearly, it's impossible to unsee it. Every memory rearranges itself, clicks into place, and suddenly the past makes sense in a way that's both clarifying and deeply unsettling. By Monday morning, I had a plan. Not a dramatic one, not a confrontation. My father had taught me better than that. When people think they're winning, they get careless. They talk too much. They reach too far. Lisa agreed. Let them believe you're considering it, she said over the phone. The moment they feel resistance, they'll pivot. But if they think you're close to agreeing, they'll show their hand. So I leaned into the role they'd already written for me. That evening at dinner, I brought it up myself. I spoke to a lawyer today, I said, casually spearing a piece of chicken. About the house. Diane's fork paused midair. Evan looked up sharply. And Diane asked, keeping her tone even. I'm tired, I said. I don't want to deal with paperwork anymore. Maybe it is time to simplify things. Evan smiled before he could stop himself. Diane reached across the table and squeezed my hand. That's very wise, Frank. I nodded slowly. Lisa suggested a trust, said it could make things easier, especially if something happens to me. Silence settled over the table, thick and expectant. That makes sense, Evan said quickly. Protects everyone. Lisa also said it's important to have someone younger involved, I continued. Someone who understands finances. Diane's eyes lit up just slightly. Exactly. I was thinking of adding Evan as a co-signer, I said. The relief on his face was immediate, unfiltered. That's really generous, he said. Diane smiled radiant. See, we're all on the same team. I pushed my plate away. I'll have Lisa draw up the paperwork. We can review it together. That night, Diane slept soundly beside me, her breathing slow, content. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering how long she'd been waiting for me to say those words. The next day, Lisa prepared a decoy packet. Not fraudulent, just incomplete. Enough to suggest progress without committing anything irreversible. We scheduled a meeting for Thursday afternoon. I made sure Evan was free. Diane insisted on being there. They arrived early. Diane wore a blazer, she usually reserved for important occasions. Evan brought a leather folder, already imagining himself in control of something he hadn't earned. Lisa greeted us warmly, professional, and unreadable. We sat around the conference table. Sunlight streamed through the window. Everything looked ordinary, safe. Lisa slid the packet toward me. Frank, before we proceed, I need to confirm something. Yes, I said. Has anyone asked you to sign documents recently without fully explaining them? Diane's smile stiffened. Well, she said lightly, we're all family here. Lisa nodded politely. That wasn't my question. Evan shifted in his chair. Lisa opened another folder. Because there was an attempt to access Frank's credit using incomplete authorization. That raises concerns. Diane's face drained of color. That must be a misunderstanding, she said quickly. Perhaps, Lisa replied, which is why we requested a record from the credit union. She slid a printed document across the table. Evan reached for it, then stopped when he saw the name. His name. This shows an online application submitted from your device, Lisa said calmly, with intent to leverage Frank's home equity. The room went still. Evan's mouth opened, then closed. Diane stood abruptly. This is ridiculous, she snapped. Frank asked us to help him. I asked for support, I said quietly, not control. Diane turned to me, eyes blazing. After everything I've done for you. I met her gaze. You sold my father's bicycle without asking. You sold his tools. You tried to open credit in my name. Tell me how that's helping. Evan slammed his fist on the table. We were trying to protect you. No, I said. My voice didn't shake. You were trying to secure yourselves. Lisa closed her folder. This meeting is over. Frank has revoked any shared authority effective immediately. Diane stared at me like she didn't recognize me. You're choosing this over us, she asked. I stood. I'm choosing myself. They left in silence. That night, Diane packed a bag. You'll regret this, she said at the door. You'll be alone. I didn't argue. The house felt strangely peaceful after she left. Empty but honest. The next morning, my phone rang. Caleb. I thought you'd want to know, he said. Diane called around this morning. Tried to sell more things. I closed my eyes. Did she? No, he said. I told her I don't buy stolen stories. For the first time in weeks, I laughed. The fallout came quietly after that. Legal notices, closed accounts, boundaries enforced. Evan stopped calling. And in the silence that followed, something unexpected happened. I felt lighter. Not vindicated, not triumphant. Just free. The bicycle came home on a quiet Saturday morning. I was in the kitchen rinsing dishes when I heard the familiar ting, soft, unmistakable, followed by the low hum of tires rolling onto the driveway. For a second, I thought my mind was playing tricks on me. Grief does that. It borrows sounds and paints pictures that aren't there. Then I looked out the window. Caleb stood at the end of the driveway, one hand on the handlebar's sunlight, catching the silver frame just the way it used to in my father's garage. The bell was still crooked, the seat still worn. Everything about it felt exactly right. I set the dish down and went outside. "Thought you might want it back," Caleb said, offering a small smile. "Your dad didn't build that bike to be flipped. He built it to last." I swallowed hard. "I don't know how to thank you." "You already did," he said, "by listening." We rolled it into the garage together. The hook on the wall waited empty and patient, like it had known this moment would come. I lifted the frame carefully, feeling the weight settle into my arms, and hung it back where it belonged. The outline on the wall disappeared. The space felt whole again. Caleb lingered for a moment, hands in his pockets. "Your father once told me something he said. He said the real inheritance isn't what you leave behind. It's what you stop others from taking." After he left, I stayed in the garage alone. I ran my hand along the handlebar over the places my father's palms had worn smooth. I remembered the first day he let go of the seat and trusted me not to fall. How terrified I'd been. How proud he'd looked when I didn't. "Keep pedaling," he'd said. "Trust yourself." The house was quieter now than it had been in years. No tension humming beneath the surface. No careful negotiations disguised as concern. Just honest silence. Evan never apologized. He sent a text a few weeks later, short, defensive, blaming stress and misunderstandings. I didn't reply. Some lessons need time to settle. Some need distance. Diane finalized the separation without much ceremony. There were no dramatic speeches, no grand confessions, just paperwork and an acknowledgement that the version of us she wanted required me to be smaller than I was willing to become. I stayed in the house. I updated the garage not to erase the past, but to make room for the present. I cleaned my father's tools, oiled them, put them back where he would have liked. I framed one page from his notebook, the one where he wrote about teaching me to ride, and hung it above the workbench. On Sunday mornings, I started taking the bicycle out. At first, just around the block, then farther, down streets I hadn't seen in years. Past the park where my father used to sit and watch me ride circles until the sun dipped low. People waved, kids stared. One man called out, "Nice ride." I smiled. I wasn't riding for exercise or nostalgia. I was riding to remind myself that balance returns when you keep moving forward. I learned something important through all of this. Control doesn't arrive wearing a villain's mask. It comes quietly, wrapped in words like help and concern and what's best for you. It counts on exhaustion, on grief, on the assumption that you'll stay polite rather than ask hard questions. My father knew that. That's why he hid the truth where only patience could find it. Why he trusted a stranger to guard it until the moment I needed it most. Why he left me tools instead of instructions. He didn't save me by fighting my battles. He saved me by teaching me how to stand my ground. Now when I walk into the garage, I don't see emptiness anymore. I see a life lived assuming the best, but prepared for the worst. I see a reminder that dignity isn't loud. It's steady. And I see proof that it's never too late to choose yourself. If you've been listening to this story and something in it feels familiar, if you've ever been told that what matters to you is just clutter, or that you should step aside for someone else's convenience, I want you to know this. You're allowed to protect your history, you're allowed to say no, and you're allowed to start again at any age. I'd really like to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Have you ever had to draw a line like this in your own life? Leave a comment below and share your story. We tell these stories because they matter, because sometimes hearing that someone else found their balance helps us find ours. If you want to keep walking this road with us, one story, one lesson at a time, please subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Let's keep going together.